Welcome back to Talking Tort Reform, Cosmetic Surgery Inquiry.
Australians now spend $1 billion a year on cosmetic treatments and procedures, which is more per capita than the United States. Roughly 500,000 cosmetic procedures were carried out last year, including breast augmentations, liposuction procedures, lip fillers, and Botox injections.
Today we'll clearly be covering the topic of cosmetic surgery and the impacts that it has on women that are looking to have cosmetic surgery, those that have had cosmetic surgery, and those that have suffered from negligent procedures.
Many Australians had suffered from negligent cosmetic procedures. However, they are not adequately compensated for their injuries. So what are your rights? Today we will focus on the state of liability, the policy and social effects, and possible reforms. Alexia, you've been extensively researching the state of liability in the cosmetic surgery cases. What is the existing legal standards in Australia?
Let's take a look.
In order for a party to be liable in a negligence claim, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant owed them a duty of care, that this duty was then breached, and that the breach has caused the plaintiff a damage that was not too far out of the defendant's scope of liability. In cases where we have to establish that a cosmetic surgeon has acted negligently, it proves to be difficult for the plaintiff to prove, as they tend to fall short in the element of causation. It is important to consider all three elements to fully understand why the law might not be as adequate as we think. Duty of care is not exactly a hurdle for those claiming negligence matters. This is because in the case of cosmetic surgery, there's already an existing duty that is established between medical practitioners and patients, as seen and explained in the case of Rogers and Whittaker. Schedule 1 of the Acts Interpretation Act 1954 Queensland states that the meaning of a medical practitioner is a person that is registered under the Health Practitioner Regulation national law to practice within the medical profession other than as a student. The Medical Board of Australia, under Section 39 of the Health Practitioner Regulation national law, as enforced in each state and territory, allows the National Board to create and approve of codes to provide guidance to these health practitioners. The Medical Board of Australia has outlined that these guidelines apply to medical practitioners under the national law who provide both cosmetic medical and surgical procedures. This has helped us establish that the duty is owed by cosmetic surgeons to their patients, seeing as they are referred to as medical practitioners. It is also important to note that under the case of Samos and Repatriation Commission, that hospitals are essentially hosting these surgeries. They also owe a non-delegable duty to their patients as well. It is clear that if a person believes that their surgery has been performed negligently and have thus suffered an injury or a loss, then they should be able to pursue a claim under negligence. The law must operate in a way that will consistently provide plaintiffs with the way to be compensated. While it might seem like cosmetic surgeons are heavily regulated in today's society, in fact they are not, and the law must do something to change this. A claim of negligence essentially rests on the element of breach. For there to be a breach, there must be a duty between a cosmetic surgeon and their patients, which was previously established. A breach of a duty is a failure to exercise reasonable care. Once a duty is established, it is then important to consider whether the duty has in fact been breached. Section 9 of the Civil Liability Act 2003 Queensland outlines that a person will not breach a duty if they take the correct precaution against the harm unless the risk is foreseeable, not significant, and in the circumstances a reasonable person would have taken precaution. Under a code of conduct for doctors in Australia, cosmetic surgeons are required to obtain the patient's consent before any procedure. If this does not occur, then there has been a clear breach. In the English case of Bolam and Fry and Hospital Management Committee, Justice McNair outlined that a doctor is not guilty of negligence if he has acted in accordance with a practice accepted as proper by a responsible body of men skilled in a particular art. But the High Court in Rogers and Whittaker rejected this test, meaning that it is not the law in Australia. However, Section 22 of the CLA essentially took this rule from Bolam and made it into law. This section of the Act states that there will be no breach of a cosmetic surgeon if they have acted in a way that is widely accepted by other cosmetic surgeons, often referred to as peer professionals, by a significant number of respected practitioners in the field. Our aim is to get the law tightened around cosmetic surgeons, and this section basically takes what we are working towards and reduces it. It will only ever be in the event that there has been a failure to follow procedure or a failure to exercise the same level of skill and care that a reasonable cosmetic surgeon would provide under the circumstances, and that the patient has suffered as a result, will the cosmetic surgeon be liable. As a woman myself, and just like the lovely ladies back in the studio and at the audience, I know I don't necessarily feel comfortable having cosmetic surgeons or any other doctor deciding on what is reasonable or what is a reasonable way to perform a procedure if my life and my body are at risk. The only thing that really limits this Section 22 of the CLA is that a peer professional opinion cannot be relied on for the purpose of this section if the court considers that the opinion is irrational. What the law needs to answer is what is considered to be a significant number, and why is it that the professional gets to decide what is reasonable? Why is it not those affected by the profession?
Another section that is important to note is Section 21 of the CLA. This section relates to the issue of failure to warn. What this section focuses on is the cosmetic surgeon's duty to warn the patient of the risks they may encounter throughout their surgery. Section 21, subsection 1 states that a cosmetic surgeon, being a doctor or medical practitioner in this case, will not be in breach of the duty to warn a patient before the patient undergoes their cosmetic surgery procedure or at the time of being given their medical advice unless they have thus failed to give or arrange to be given to the patient a variety of information about the risk. Section 21, subsection 1a states that it is important that a plaintiff that is in the position to have a procedure done will be required to be put in the position where they are going to be able to make a reasonably informed decision about whether to undergo the treatment or follow the advice that is given by the surgeon. Additionally, Section 21, subsection b states that a cosmetic surgeon should know and ought to reasonably know that the patient would want to be given information about the risks prior to deciding whether to undergo the surgery or follow the treatment and advice. Subsection 2 outlines that the reference to patient refers to the person that has responsibility for making a decision about this medical treatment that is to be undergone by the patient if the patient is under a legal disability. An example of this would be a parent to an infant child. It was found that last year in 2018, 2 women in their early 20s went into cardiac arrest during breast augmentations in New South Wales, along with a South Australian woman dying of a lethal infection contracted during the liposuction procedure. Dr. Hussain, a plastic surgeon, even commented on the cosmetic surgery industry and stated that there are risks associated with any form of cosmetic surgery, and before someone undertakes that, they need to be satisfied that those risks are as low as possible and that they are having it done in the best possible environment for themselves. Patients should be aware of every possible risk, not just the most common ones mentioned above. Not only should they be informed of the risks, but also the procedures that these doctors are supposed to be following. It would be interesting to find out whether the 2 women from New South Wales that went into cardiac arrest on the table were aware that this was a risk of their breast augmentations. Were they even warned?
The final element of negligence is causation. Once the court has established that a duty does exist and that the duty of care has been breached, it is then time to consider that the breach was an actual and immediate cause of the harm that was suffered by the plaintiff. Our focus is Section 11 of the CLA, which outlines both factual causation and the scope of liability. Section 11 of the CLA is designed to tighten the law to make it harder for plaintiffs to be compensated. In order to determine whether a cosmetic surgeon's breach has both actually and immediately caused the plaintiff's harm will be determined by Section 11 and whether that can be satisfied. Section 11, subsection 1a covers factual causation, which is the but-for test, and it states that the breach of a duty must be a necessary condition of the occurrence of harm. In cosmetic negligence cases, what would have happened if the defendant did follow the necessary procedures and took the right precautions? Would the plaintiff's injury still have occurred? The second limb of causation is from Section 11, subsection 1b, and this is the scope of liability. Here, this section states that it is appropriate for the scope of liability of a person in breach to extend to the harm so caused. What this means is that even if the plaintiff is able to prove that the harm that was suffered was as a result of the defendant's negligent actions, the harm suffered can't be too remote to the defendant. This is an element for the court to decide. In deciding whether the scope of liability should actually be extended to the defendant, the court must consider the appropriateness of delegating this liability on the defendant, being a cosmetic surgeon in this case. Women that are considering cosmetic surgery are considering it to either enhance or improve their looks. If the surgeon has done something wrong or not followed the correct procedure, then they should have to bear the consequences. Therefore, in order to ensure that patients and plaintiffs feel comfortable with their surgery, maybe we need to consider better education around this issue, along with many adjustments to the relevant law.
With regards to Section 21 and Section 11 being the issue of causation, it is important to refer back to Section 11, subsection 3b. This part of the section is another place where the plaintiff tends to fall down and lose their argument. As a whole, Section 11, subsection 3 states that if it is relevant in terms of deciding factual causation to decide what the patient who suffered the harm would have done if the cosmetic surgeon was not in breach, then as stated by subsection 3a, the matter is to be decided subjectively in the light of all relevant circumstances subject to the following subsection. Subsection 3b states that any statement made by a patient after suffering the harm about what he or she would have done is inadmissible as evidence unless the statement is against his or her interest. This is where the plaintiff tends to fall down, as they are no longer allowed to say that they never would have had the cosmetic surgery if they had known of the risks. This is where the argument of the law being far too defendant-friendly comes from. Seeing it as is the patient that is having the surgery, they should be able to give enough evidence in their cases to at least give them a chance of winning and being compensated. As a result of this Section 11, subsection 3b, part of the plaintiff's evidence isn't even admissible. Is this really fair? Is this really just?
Hypothetically speaking, if the plaintiff were to establish all the necessary elements of a negligence claim, there are a couple of defences that cosmetic surgeons could use. These include voluntary assumption of risk and an application of Section 22 of the CLA. In terms of voluntary assumption of risk, this is outlined in Section 14 of the CLA, and it states that an injury cannot be done to a person if they have voluntarily assumed the risk of being injured. Essentially what is being said here is that in cosmetic surgery negligence cases, if there is a risk that is seen to be an obvious one, it is assumed that the plaintiff is aware of this risk, unless they can prove on the balance of probabilities that they were not aware of the risk. The second defence comes from Section 22 of the CLA, which refers to the standard of care of professionals. As mentioned previously, this section of the Act says that there will be no breach of a cosmetic surgeon if they have acted in a way that is widely accepted by other cosmetic surgeons, so long as it is by a significant number of respected practitioners within the same field. While the law does seem to favour defendants in this case, there are a few categories in which a plaintiff can recover damages. Damage is a recognised category of harm that includes things such as physical personal injury or psychiatric harm. Damages is the compensation that the plaintiff will be trying to claim. The categories of damage that I'm going to discuss include nominal and compensatory damages. When looking at nominal damages, these aren't really given in negligence torts. This is because it's only a small sum of money that is given to the plaintiff to acknowledge the fact that they won. In a cosmetic surgery negligence claim, you will want to sue for a lot more than what nominal damages will give you. A plaintiff suing in this case will want to sue under compensatory damages. This includes two types of damages, which are special damages and general damages. Special damages refer to the items of loss that the plaintiff has suffered prior to the date of the case being heard, and those that are capable of being calculated. General damages, however, come from the injuries that are not capable of being precisely calculated. Section 51 of the CLA outlines the type of general damages, and they include pain and suffering, loss of amenities of life, loss of expectation of life, or disfigurement. Within the CLA, there is an assessment of damages for personal injury section under Chapter 3 and a range of damages that can be claimed by the plaintiff. In Schedule 4, Part 1, Section 7, Subsection 1 of the Civil Liability Regulation 2014 Queensland, there is a table of injuries that people can claim for, ranked based on severity. However, if someone is unaware that they are suffering from a particular loss, then they don't have to be compensated for it. Additionally, the plaintiff cannot satisfy the elements of negligence and they will not be compensated in any way, shape or form.
So we've just covered the state of liability. Let's move on to the policy and social effects.
It is unknown how many cosmetic procedures are being performed in Australia due to the fact the surgery is elective, is not covered by Medicare, and a wide range of physicians perform the procedures. However, Australians spend an estimated $1 billion on cosmetic procedures each year. Statistics provide women had 91% of all procedures in the United States and 90% in the United Kingdom in 2011. While statistics in Australia are not definitive due to lack of regulation, a clear trend can be established that cosmetic surgery is undertaken mostly by women. In 2015, the Australasian College of Cosmetic Surgeons reported approximately 8,000 breast augmentation surgeries performed each year in Australia and about 30,000 liposuction procedures. Botox expenditure has skyrocketed to $350 million as the industry sees a 20% rise. A study by Birthmark found that 2/3 of duty claims against medical practitioners involved failure to follow procedure. From a policy viewpoint, the New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission report called for more consumer protection, improved practices to health and safety, and appropriate advertising. In response, in 2016, the Medical Board of Australia issued medical guidelines that apply to medical practitioners, including specialist plastic surgeons, cosmetic surgeons, and cosmetic physicians, regardless of their qualifications. The guidelines impose mandatory cooling off periods, mandatory consultations with a medical practitioner before prescribing cosmetic injectables, and that the treating medical practitioner provides the patient with post-operative care. However, these guidelines were introduced with the aim not to overly regulate the industry. In 2017, health ministers indicated they sought to crack down on those that dress themselves up as surgeons. However, little development has occurred. Without proper enforcement of regulations and a minimum qualification requirement, patients will continue to be unfairly harmed. Professor Marilyn Walton criticised the medical board for not including adequate training and qualification in its guidelines.
If we don't regulate this industry, more people will be harmed. There'll be more players will come in, more people without knowledge and skills thinking it's an area to make a lot of money very quickly, but it will be at the expense and cost of patients.
In Australia, the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons is the only recognised body to train surgeons. If the practitioner is not a fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, they are not qualified. Despite this, many cosmetic procedures are undertaken without recognised surgery qualification, which takes 12 years of specialised training in cosmetic procedures. However, for doctors to be called cosmetic surgeons, they only require a basic medical degree. A predominant area of concern, according to the Australasian College of Cosmetic Surgery, is that medical practitioners are not required to have specialised plastic surgery training in cosmetic procedures due to lack of government regulation. Additionally, Section 13 of the Health Practitioner Regulation National Law provides that specialist recognition exists in the medical profession. However, cosmetic surgery is not a recognised specialty. Thus, the medical board does not have any authority to grant specialty titles in the growing field, along with no minimum training requirements. Medical professionals receive little theoretical training within cosmetic surgery, despite the complexity of procedures and medical instruments used. This presents a risk to patient safety as it increases the risk of negligent medical practices being carried out due to lack of adequate training and limited expertise. Common areas of mistake involve lack of sanitation, improper use of sedation and disfigurement. Where repeatedly organisations call for government to further regulate the industry, installing a higher standard of qualification to prevent the harm to patients, it still remains vastly under-regulated, heightening the propensity for negligent practices. Unlike other medical industries, cosmetic surgery is densely advertised and promoted to the public. The industry targets patients' vulnerabilities, offering them a more desirable body. The concern is that this violates ethical boundaries, drawing the consumer away from the real and substantial risks involved with getting cosmetic procedures. Thus, the industry places more emphasis on a business model to make money rather than patient care. For example, in 2018, Four Corners exposed the high volume and low-cost practices of the Cosmetic Institute, which rendered its patients unconscious during procedures. TCI was found in breach of their duty of care by adopting a one-size-fits-all approach to cosmetic surgeries. One doctor, Dr. Blackstock, charged $5,900 for breast implant surgeries, half the cost of the usual procedure.
His calling card was his low price, making cosmetic surgery accessible for a larger demographic.
So you're actually just putting an armless into your chest right now?
He was a medical doctor, but not a trained plastic surgeon.
Advertisement standards for healthcare is consolidated in the guidelines for medical practitioners who perform cosmetic medical and surgical procedures. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission recognised the major issues facing advertisement of cosmetic surgery is exaggerated claims glamorising surgery, lack of education regarding qualification and titles, and misleading claims about certification and approval. Enforcement measures for misleading advertising include legal proceedings, registering a complaint, and private litigation. However, concerns about advertising in this industry are not adequately dealt with by these actions, as they are not accessible remedies. Social media is a rising form of advertising with implications on the mental health of the public. With 60% of Australians accessing the internet more than 5 times a day, and 80% of internet users having a social media account, the impact of social media is unequivocal. Census provides that 88% of online consumers use social media. Social media acts as a tool of comparison, therefore this impacts body image and self-esteem. Influencers actively promote and endorse cosmetic surgery to their followers, facilitating the growing desire to have cosmetic procedures. Tranter from the University of Tasmania affirms, cosmetic surgery is driven by a desire to conform to media-enforced ideas of beauty and body shape. While Deanne affirms that social networking is affecting adolescents, eliciting appearance investment, leading them to undertake appearance-enhancing strategies, facilitating a desire to undertake cosmetic surgery. The New South Wales Government's Healthcare Complaints Commission urges consumers to research before receiving any form of cosmetic surgery. However, information is not clearly provided. Further, research shows a link between those suffering with mental health issues, particularly body dysmorphic disorder, and seeking unnecessary cosmetic surgery. While cosmetic surgery is easily accessible, psychological support is not as accessible. A study conducted by Monash University found that 97% of general practitioners had been asked about genital normative, and more than half had requested to have genital female cosmetic surgery, ranging from the ages of 10 to 65. In these cases, more than half of GPs suspect mental health issues in their patients. The Australian government statistics indicate a 140% increase in requests for this surgery. This is a particular issue when examining Section 11.3b of the CLA because people with body dysmorphic disorder and a history of undergoing surgery may not be able to provide they would not have had the surgery had they been warned. Due to the methods of advertising inducing patients to believe a positive outcome is guaranteed, consumers lack appropriate education before getting the procedures. leading consumers to make uneducated choices and be unaware of the prior risks before undergoing cosmetic procedures. The Australian Medical Board provides it as a goal to provide educational resources to consumers, informing them of the risks involved in cosmetic surgery. Advertising needs to be more regulated, and the government should have more consumer education surrounding cosmetic surgery. While regulation currently operates to regulate traditional advertising methods, the reality is that surgeons hire social media influencers to promote their procedures. This continues to enforce an unrealistic standard of beauty, and the government needs to consider implementing more guidelines to regulate this modern form of advertising within the cosmetic tourism industry and cosmetic surgery overall. Clearly, Australia needs to enforce further regulatory measures, including higher standards of qualification. Moreover, higher standards of consumer and psychological education need to be an initiative undertaken in this field. This is important to ensure a high standard of public health and limit harm to the public. So we've discussed the policy and social implications of cosmetic surgery, but how can we change this?
Well, next, I'll be looking at why we need reform in the area of cosmetic surgery.
The current system of compensation for medical injuries is a fault-based system that relies predominantly on the tort of negligence. Liability will be established where the plaintiff can prove on the balance of probabilities the existence of a duty of care, a breach of the duty of care, and causation of the injury by the breach of duty. According to established doctrine, tort law fulfills several purposes, including providing compensation, loss shifting and spreading, and deterrence. Proponents of the fault-based system of compensation contend that this framework enables the determination of appropriate levels of compensation for individual cases and provides behavioural incentive to avoid harm. Furthermore, the structure of court decisions and precedent is sufficient to allow informed out-of-court settlements. Liability in tort law is traditionally justified by the notion of corrective justice. The key purpose of corrective justice is to redress damage caused by a moral wrong. Each individual has a primary moral duty not to harm others. Thus, when an individual culpably violates this moral duty, a secondary moral duty to correct the injustice arises. Injustices are to be corrected in an immediate personal interaction between the wrongdoer and the victim. Fault is central to corrective justice. Therefore, only victims of wrongfully or negligently caused injuries are afforded compensation. Large numbers of people suffer complications from cosmetic procedures. However, only a small percentage of these adverse outcomes, between 17 and 26%, are due to negligence, fault, or error by cosmetic surgeons. Inequities arise where a person has clearly suffered injury as a result of a cosmetic procedure, but is unable to meet the plaintiff's onus of proving negligence in court. The law fails to compensate innocent victims of accident. Considerable reform following the release of the IP report in 2002 was intended to stabilise indemnity costs and reduce the number of litigated claims. However, the fault-based system of compensation remains expensive and inefficient and provides arbitrary and unfair compensation for patients of cosmetic surgery. Litigation costs comprise an estimated 44% of plaintiff settlements. Litigation is lengthy and means that plaintiffs may remain uncompensated for long periods of time. The average medical negligence case takes between 12 and 18 months to resolve. However, in some instances, the claim may take more than 2 years. It is estimated that between 30 and 40% of medical negligence claims do not succeed, either because they are withdrawn or successfully contested. The adversarial process creates a climate of hostility rather than focusing on rehabilitation of the injured, which can lead to poorer outcomes. Lump sum damages often fail to meet the long-term costs of care and other expenses due to inaccurate predictions, poor investment, and misuse or mismanagement of the funds by the recipient and others. Discordant outcomes occur in approximately 25% of negligence cases. The once and for all assessment of injuries frequently undercompensates severely injured plaintiffs, and the nuisance value of trivial injuries may result in overcompensation for smaller claims. Furthermore, only 6.25 to 16% of negligently injured patients actually receive compensation. The effectiveness of tort law as a deterrent is largely undermined by the presence of comprehensive liability insurance. Cosmetic surgeons are almost universally insured against claims of medical malpractice. The existence of insurance curtails incentives for taking safety precautions. A fault-based negligence scheme also cannot deter non-intentional errors and inadvertent negligence. it is argued that tort liability produces overservicing and defensive medicine, which in turn greatly increases the cost of cosmetic procedures, as well as deterring many cosmetic surgeons from engaging more actively in reporting adverse events. As an alternative to the fault-based system, a no-fault system of compensation has been viewed as having the potential to overcome problems inherent in the tort system. The main functions of no-fault compensation schemes are to provide compensation for injury, accountability and deterrence, and mechanisms that enable learning. No-fault compensation schemes allow patients to pursue compensation from government-funded sources without the necessity of proving fault or negligence. The patient need only demonstrate that the medical error was a causative factor in the resultant injury. Successful claims are paid in a uniform manner according to a fixed benefits schedule. Patients may receive compensation for both economic losses, including medical and rehabilitative expenses and loss of earnings, and non-economic losses, such as pain and suffering. In exchange for receiving compensation, the right to sue in negligence is relinquished. The priorities of no-fault compensation include rehabilitation of injured people and accident prevention. Instead of deterring cosmetic surgeons from substandard care, the no-fault system of compensation encourages cosmetic surgeons to engage in more complete recording of adverse outcomes. This leads to improvements in patient safety. No-fault compensation schemes are founded upon the principle of distributive justice. Distributive justice refers to the fair apportionment of a benefit or burden across society. It is the basis for the theory that one of the purposes of tort law is risk spreading, or the just distribution of the cost of accidents. The benefits of a no-fault medical indemnity scheme include more predictable care and support over a person's lifetime and more consistent coverage of all injured people, regardless of the particular circumstances in which the person was injured. Benefits are primarily provided in the form of ongoing care, rather than as lump sums. This eliminates the risks of mismanagement and subsequent insufficiency to meet future medical expenses. Compensation under a no-fault scheme is timely. Approximately 70% of injuries are compensated within 2 months, and 96% of injuries are compensated within 6 months. No-fault schemes also exhibit a comparative advantage over the tort system with respect to administrative costs. As a result, more funds go directly to patient care. No-fault compensation inherently fails to provide any measure of deterrence for substandard treatment. However, this can be overcome by the establishment of a separate accountability framework and deterrence mechanism. The most significant disadvantages of the no-fault compensation system are its tendency to undercompensate victims and its removal of the possibility to seek legal recourse for wrongful or negligent conduct. Hybrid schemes allow the plaintiff to receive both no-fault and fault benefits. This option proposes introducing defined statutory benefits for anyone injured while undergoing cosmetic procedures, regardless of fault, with the retention of common law benefits for those injured as a result of negligent practices. Hybrid compensation schemes combine advantages from both fault and no-fault systems, resulting in compensation for a higher number of plaintiffs. Therefore, the implementation of a hybrid compensation scheme is highly recommended. The theory of corrective justice provides for the rectification of wrongs committed by one individual that cause harm to another. Each individual who is harmed by a moral wrong committed by another has a right to rectification. Distributive justice is concerned with the fair apportionment of the burdens and benefits of risky activities across society. The hybrid system of compensation is consistent with both corrective and distributive justice. According to Joan Conahan, the feminist legal endeavour is to bring a gendered perception of legal and social arrangements to bear upon a largely gender-neutral understanding of them. Feminist legal theorists have often criticised tort law for failing to provide compensation for injuries that disproportionately affect women. For example, women are more likely to undergo cosmetic procedures than men. Research suggests that women litigate their claims at much lower rates than men. And where women do litigate, there is a disproportionate rate of recovery, with women less likely to receive compensation. Under the proposed hybrid system, litigation would be largely unnecessary in cases of minor injury due to the provision of no-fault benefits. For injury resulting from negligent cosmetic procedures, further legislative amendments will be required to ensure that plaintiffs are adequately compensated. Disability jurisprudence deems the person with a disability as one who is more limited by social attitudes and environmental barriers than any inherent defect or deficiency within the person that must be remedied. One of the fundamental goals of tort litigation is restoring the plaintiff to the position they were in before they were injured, or in other words, making the plaintiff whole. Plaintiffs in tort litigation frequently seek compensation for bodily injuries. Thus, the references to making the plaintiff whole suggest that plaintiffs with disabilities are less than whole. Hybrid compensation schemes conceptualise damages as the plaintiff's anticipated medical costs as a result of the injury, rather than compensation for the plaintiff's losses. Furthermore, tort litigation unfairly discriminates against plaintiffs with disabilities on the basis of the cause of their disability. Conversely, under hybrid compensation schemes, compensation for disabilities sustained as a result of cosmetic procedures is awarded according to defined and uniform statutory benefits. Past reforms that have been made to the Queensland regulations have not been to restrict individual medical practitioners, but rather to ensure that the facilities where they practice are suitably equipped and staffed to deal with the level of risk involved with these procedures. For example, in 2018, the Private Health Facilities Act of 1999 was amended, requiring prescribed cosmetic surgical procedures, including breast augmentation or reduction, facial implants, and rhinoplasticity, to take place in licensed premises only. It is imperative that further reforms focus on more stringent regulation of medical practitioners who perform these cosmetic procedures. At present, cosmetic surgery is not recognised as a specialty practice of surgery under Schedule 1 of the Health Insurance Regulation of 2018. The title of cosmetic surgeon is therefore not indicative of specialist qualification or accreditation. According to the Australian Society of Plastic Surgeons, cosmetic surgery is not a trivial surgery. Anaesthesia and surgery carries risks, and it's vitally important that all surgeries, including cosmetic procedures, are carried out by appropriately qualified surgeons. Therefore, cosmetic surgery must be recognised as a specialty under Section 1 of the Health Insurance Regulation of 2018. This will require medical practitioners to undergo appropriate postgraduate study in order to receive specialist accreditation. Furthermore, Sections 11 and 22 of the Civil Liabilities Act of 2003 are serious impediments to plaintiffs seeking compensation for injuries sustained as a result of negligence. Therefore, the following amendments are advised.
So, at the beginning of this episode, I covered the state of liability and the law surrounding negligence within cosmetic surgery. It is clear and obvious that the law is not adequately compensating its plaintiffs, which all three of us have agreed on.
The need for regulation is an obvious area that requires development. The social pressure of social media and the growing commercialisation of the industry has led to consumers being poorly informed. Governments must act to ensure patient care is paramount, and further regulation is a necessity.
As Alexia said earlier, our current fault-based system of law fails to adequately compensate patients who receive substandard treatment. This is why we are recommending that we move away from this fault-based system to a hybrid system. Additionally, we recommend the implementation of stricter legislative requirements surrounding medical practitioners performing cosmetic surgery. These reforms will ensure that Australian women are adequately protected from medical negligence in the cosmetic surgery industry.
Well, ladies, that's it for today's episode of Talking Tort Reform. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for watching.